thank you all for coming. My name's Dr. Amira Rose Davis, and I am so pleased to welcome you to our event today, Double Crossover, Gender, Media, and Politics in Global Basketball. First, I would like to thank everybody who came together to make this happen. The Warfield Center, the Center for Sports Communication, Michael Butterworth and Chris Hart, thank you so much. The Department of Radio, Television, and Film. I feel like I'm missing. Oh, the Humanities Institute. Of course, we were really like the MVPs of this whole shenanigan today. So I'm so pleased to do this event to kick off and celebrate Dr. Courtney Cox, who is a dear friend and in many ways, and I'm gonna get emotional, in many ways, like one of my best favorite interlocutors, and to celebrate and learn from her book, Double Crossover. This is the book. I want everybody to go get it from an independent bookstore. Thank you, that would be great. And so this is what we're gonna do today. I'm going to turn it over, and Dr. Cox is going to introduce her book, talk a little bit about the work, and then we will get on stage, myself, and we're so excited to be joined as well by Imani McGee-Stafford, who both of them, by the way, are returning, and both of them are UT alum. So please join me in welcoming them back to campus. And then the three of us are going to have a panel discussion about themes raised in the book, themes raised in the talk, and also just a general conversation about all of these topics. And then we will open it up for Q&A. So as we're talking, if you have questions percolating, if you want to join the conversation, we really encourage you and invite you to do that. I'll tell you when, and then you can come up, and we'll all chit-chat a little bit. And this, of course, is a great pregame as well. Women's basketball tips off tonight at 8 p.m. versus LSU. It's fairly sold out, but if you don't have a ticket, you might go try to get one. Or you can watch on TV and support them as well. So while you watch that game, maybe some of these things are going to still be playing in your head. So without any further ado, I am so pleased to introduce Dr. Courtney Cox to talk about her book, Double Crossover.
Hey, y'all. This is fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. I started having this feeling when you were talking, and I was like, man, I'm like the thing before LSU, Texas. And it reminded me, I was fortunate enough to be at Coachella when Beyonce performed and decided, yeah. But there were all the people that had to go on before Coachella happened. And so I'm having that moment of like, man, the game is on the other side of this. Anyway, so with that, I'm Haim right now. Haim performed before Beyonce. And the whole time they were performing, and I love Haim, they're one of my favorite bands, and they would be like, y'all, Beyonce is gonna be out here soon. So they also had the same feeling. So I have that feeling now. As a Longhorn coming back here, it means so much to me. I attended this college before it was Moody, before it was Bilo. I'm one of the precursors. I went to the Irwin Center, so I'm dating myself already. But I'm really excited to be here. And one of the things I just want to do, I'm not going to read from the book. You don't want to hear me just read aloud. That's not my scene. But what I thought I could maybe do is share a little bit about the process and the book, why I made this book, why this book matters to me, some of the issues, and then I think it would be really fun just to spend time. One of the things that's important to me in the work, I center athletes' voices. I think they're way more interesting than academic ones. I'm sure you'll agree. And so my job is to just set the scene so we can have a fantastic conversation. The other thing I want to do is give a little bit of background about who I am before we dive in, if that's okay. I don't get to do this nearly enough, but I majored in broadcast journalism. I still believe in journalism. I think it's very important. And I had switched here. When I first came in, I was an advertising major. And one of the things that I think in being in this space and being part of campus media, anyone in here part of campus media, Daily Texan, radio, TV? Anyone? Yes, thank you. Thank you for your service. So important because it not only set the stage for me to have my first job, which was ESPN, but it also helped me pick up these skills that you can't learn in a classroom, that you have to actually do by learning. So I really encourage you, if you're interested in writing, if you're interested in creating anything, I think this is still a fantastic campus to learn by doing. There's great things in the classroom. I believe in classrooms as well. But there's also something fantastic. So I'd like to give that shout out. I moved from Austin to Bristol, Connecticut to work at ESPN in event production and later on studio directing. And that really drove a lot of my interest in my work. And so even when I came back to Austin for Longhorn Network, I worked there as well, RIP, as well as coming back for my master's degree at Texas. One of the things that really drove me was thinking about labor. And before I was thinking about labor for sports journalists, the kind of labor they were having to do as Twitter is starting, having to do this double thing. When do we and how do we break news when we have to do things online, but we also have newsroom practices? How do we verify sources when an athlete says, I'm being traded, do we just believe them? What does it mean when athletes start to break their own news? These are questions that we now kind of think of as the status quo, but they really drove my kind of inquiry. And so I got into the research stuff. I found the nerdy kind of aspects of grad school to be fantastic. And so I got a PhD at the USC Annenberg School for Communication, and I'm now at the University of Oregon. And so one of the things I'll say along that way, I kind of moved from thinking about the labor of sports journalists to thinking about the labor of athletes. And a lot of that happened for me, again, like by happenstance, of moving to LA, being in a city with a WNBA team for the first time, and really falling in love with the W. And so that brought on new questions for me, and I then decided I should work for the WNBA before I could even start to ask even more questions, very hands-on learner. And in that time, it really drove a lot of the questions that I have today. Okay, so 2 photos here. Left side is 2009. As we see, we used to do this thing in the midst of a recession where we would send these big body brackets to the White House. I know this doesn't even sound real, but we used to do this, and we would have the President of the United States, amidst many things, fill out a men's and women's bracket. And so we would sit down, we'd have Joey brackets there, and they would like fill these things out. And so one of the things that I think about is how, even in this photo, me outside of the Sports Center studio, where Barack Obama has signed off on this bracket, this idea of the infusion of sports and politics is very tangible there. The photo on the right-hand side is at my dissertation defense, and so if there are any graduate students, it can happen for you. It's possible. It happened to me. That's my dissertation defense after I found out I passed. And for me at the time, I was really questioning how they let me write a dissertation about basketball, and that passed muster for a communication PhD. But I'll tell you, I then decided to make that into a book. And it's this one. And so one of the things that I just kind of want to go through as I talk about the big kind of understanding, what does double crossover mean? That's one thing you'll know by the end of this, is thinking about this relationship between all of these experiences. So I always tell undergrads a couple of things. One, disappoint your parents. It will happen. My dad wanted me to be a medical doctor. That did not happen. I decided journalism, and he was like, you're gonna be broke forever. Not completely wrong, but it's really important to have these moments, these passions that really drive you. I knew sport was one of them, and I also knew early on that I would not be playing professionally. I knew that around middle school. So with that, that really drove my interest. So finding the thing you love, the passion, disappointing your parents, both important, not in equal measure, but both important. Okay, so this book, Double Crossover, Gender, Media, and Politics in Global Basketball, started for me in 2015. I worked for the Sparks. I met this incredible player, one of Pat Summitt's last recruits, Sierra Burdick. And Sierra had just been drafted by the Sparks. And yet when I met her for Media Day, and Media Day is the day where they shoot all the Jumbotron stuff, all the make some noise, all those things, right? So I'm assigned to this rookie, and we're walking through. So before she's even played 1 minute of WNBA basketball, she's already signed a contract to play in Italy. So she's telling me about this, and I'm like, how are you thinking ahead of like, you haven't even played here yet, but you're thinking about the season after. And so she's like, this is the way you have to think. You have to figure this out. You have to have someone, an international agent. You have to figure out your life in this cyclical way. And so I started thinking like, wow, I should go to Italy. This is a great dissertation project. I go to Italy, I have the pasta, the Naples, like the Naples pizza, iconic. And so I was like, cool, we keep in touch, we keep talking. And so I get ready to do my dissertation research. I'm like, where are we going? Is it feeling like Italy? Italy feels cute. As you may know from this photo, this is not Italy. This is actually Kazan, Russia, where Sierra was playing for Kazanochka. So my Italy dreams were slightly dismissed, but it helped me also understand how these flows of labor change from season to season. It's like, I'm going wherever Sierra's going. She says we're going to Russian winter, we're doing Russian winter. And so my sites were not pre-selected. I ended up in Russia, France, and across the US. But they were really driven by where athletes were allowing me to spend time with them and follow them around and ask them really silly questions. And then also, especially thinking about both in terms of logistics and grad budgets, I did a lot of virtual work, both Skyping folks. I remember talking to Elizabeth Williams, and she was playing in China. And so like China to LA time zone, I was like, so we were both in our bonnets. We were just like middle of the night for both of us. We're both here, as well as thinking about the impact of COVID on this work, right? So I had this idea of traveling around the world with athletes, figuring out how they work, and 2020 changed all of that. So I graduated in 2019. I think I have a book. I actually don't. And then 2020 happens. We have the wobble, right? So we're thinking about, instead of movement, we have these immobile kind of moments where we're stuck in one place. So I thought about what the impact of the wobble meant, especially in 2020, a season marked twice by pandemic and protest, right? And so the book changes again with these kind of moments as they're happening. Transfer portal happens. I'm like, there's a labor moment. NIL happens. If you're an international athlete, you can't make NIL money. So even when we think about these reverse flows of immigration and migration, these shape a lot of things. I also spent a lot of time listening to athletes in the media they produce. So thinking about social media and the impact. So the different ways that those aren't filtered in the same mechanisms as a press conference, for example, or these other forms that it takes through brands, et cetera. So I was really interested in the kind of media athletes make for themselves. When they start a YouTube account to talk about their experience playing overseas. When they make their own kind of influencer money, what are the ways that they still find voice outside of that? Okay. Big questions. How do athletes and advocates of women's basketball understand the sport through the broader sports media complex? That is the relationship between brands, media, audience experience, and reaction. All these places, the sports organizations themselves, global governing bodies like FIBA, the IOC, et cetera. All these relationships that are happening. And how do those operating within this industry utilize that embodied knowledge of these kind of exclusionary practices to think about alternative possibilities? I think about this idea of choreography. The crossover is really coming up here. And then how do they share these tactics to create space for one another? There were so many times where athletes were saying, someone I talked to said, don't play here, you won't get paid on time. Or they would say, hey, I heard this is a great place to play for. Or I heard this coach may be cool, they may understand your situation. So I'm interested in not in this idea of we can compete on the court, we can look out for each other off of it, and thinking about the different kinds of knowledge that folks produce there. Okay, I don't want to assume everyone here is a basketball fan, but you're here, so there's a small percentage chance. What I'd like to do maybe is just give you a little insight as to what the crossover is. I don't want to make any assumptions. Okay, so this very short video, you will understand visually what's going to happen. All right, so it's not as flashy as a dunk or as violent as a block, but the crossover is about agility, balance, and deception. It demands rapid lateral movement with seemingly little effort. It also requires a particular sense of poise and control to challenge an opponent's balance, leaving adversaries helpless as they flail, trip, or crash to the ground. We call this breaking ankles on the court. The crossover relies upon an athlete knowing where they are on the court and where they need to go, shifting from one side to the other rapidly and following an internal rhythm. The well-timed crossover allows one to create space for themselves and their teammates, ultimately allowing for a clear path to the basket. Now, we have not only a poet in the room with us, but also poet and cultural critic Hanif Abdurraqib, who devotes an entire essay to the crossover and writes that, quote, the thing about a crossover is that perhaps more than any other signature dribble move, it relies on trust. A defender willing to trust you and what they understand about you and your willingness to deceive them. The main strength of a crossover is that it works best when you are being closely guarded, end quote. So for me, I use a variety of scholars to think through this. Amy Meredith Cox's work is really important, this idea of choreography. She comes from a dance background and is thinking about these kind of strategies of movement, especially for her participants who are Black girls and women at a Detroit shelter. I think about this through Legacy Russell, who works in an art space, of thinking about the glitch and what a glitch feminism could look like in terms of intentionally malfunctioning, intentionally making moves that are against a system. And I think about this through Sam Shepard's work of critical muscle memory, the idea of knowing how these systems and structures work, the way you learn and hone those skills for athletes is not unlike the way they have to hone their bodies. There's also a mental, emotional intelligence that they possess as they move through these spaces. The chapter overview, I spent a lot of time introducing these concepts in the intro. I talk about the 2020 season, that chapter, Betting on Ourselves. I think a really timely one as we come up on another CBA. I write about the 2020 CBA as this kind of intro as we go into that 2020 Wobble season. I then move over to thinking about playing overseas. Again, me and Sierra hanging out in Russia together, as well as in France. In the third quarter, I talk a little bit about newer leagues coming up. Unrivaled is not quite out when I'm finishing this book, and my press told me I could not add another chapter. And so I spent 2 seasons with Athletes Unlimited, a really fantastic league that's pushing a lot of the concepts that are kind of pushed in the first quarter forward. And then finally, the fourth quarter, again, like a basketball game, I think about the NCAA, the changes that have happened over the past 6 years. Okay. With all of that, that's the book, that's the vibe. And I want to think about, especially in this moment, there are a lot of headlines you may have read, a lot of questions you may have about collective bargaining, about labor. I love talking about this. We should definitely talk about it during the Q&A. But when I think about these chapters and how they all fit together, the main thing I think about is both the expectations of where people should or shouldn't be, as well as the ways that folks are moving around it. So again, as we are having yet another conversation about CBAs and a lack of, perhaps proposals on the side of the WNBA, I'm really interested in thinking about what this means, especially as we reach another moment where athletes are speaking out and having another moment of thinking about not only our country's relationship to state violence, but what this means for the future. As I moved into different countries, different contexts, this is actually in Bourges, France, during a playoff basketball game I went to. And one of the things I also think about is how culture translates. So this definitely looks more like kind of the TIFO you would see for soccer. And I thought about the indoor, like the confined kind of space of thinking about the participation, the understandings people have about what basketball overseas looks like. Also really happy to talk about that. One thing I will say, I want us to have a conversation, so I'll kind of pause it here, is the other new kind of possibilities that are happening. One of them is Project B. People may have heard about it. People may have thoughts. We can absolutely talk about it. But what it means is there are more stateside options, that there's also a new kind of option for athletes that want to play overseas through this new global league that moves around very much like your tennis tour, like Formula One, this idea of a lot of money that's being funneled into women's sports that everyone keeps telling me is a really good thing, right? But my question is for who? Who makes this money? Who gets to spend it? And what does this ultimately mean for athletes? So I highly recommend going to good sources where you have folks like Jordan Robinson, Cheryl Swoops that are kind of talking about things like Project B. I mentioned Athletes Unlimited is one option. There's Imani in the center from season 1. So one of the things I think about with AU and these other leagues is what the kind of affordances of new leagues are doing to push forward leagues that may have been a bit more stagnant like the WNBA. What do the kind of options and player agency do in terms of giving players kind of the momentum, the receipts to say, look, they're able to do this, why can't y'all, right? And then again, with these new leagues, Unrivaled is a 3-on-3 league. It's different. And it's also different than FIBA's 3-on-3, which again, I have style things we can talk about there, and the expectations. But even with the growth of 3-on-3 on the IOC level, thinking about it as an Olympic sport, I'm really interested in thinking about what the future of women's basketball looks like as 3-on-3 in all of its shapes and facets kind of takes form. I love 3-on-3 basketball. I think there's a certain kind of intelligence that it takes to really know basketball. You can get exposed really quickly in 3-on-3. So I love thinking about that and thinking about what the branding, the marketing of these leagues also means. One of the things people are constantly saying is like, wow, the women's game, man, it's just growing. And I end my book with saying the game has grown. It's been grown for a long time. I feel really strongly about that. But these markers of growth that I see, I'm curious as to how people are negotiating, navigating, thinking through growth. Is it about how many folks you can pack into an arena? That's one kind of measurement. Or is it, I would argue, about the ways that there's a lack of growth, attention, or importance that's given, especially when I think about, this is from 2024, the Sweet 16 Elite 8 in Portland, where I was, where the actual three-point line was 9 inches shorter Texas fans know this, right? 9 inches shorter on one side than the other before the NC State game. They've already played Sweet 16. We're going into Elite 8, and they're like, oh, we didn't measure this correctly on one side. And so what you have is two teams that are forced to reckon with what this means. You have an option. We could stop down. People are already in this arena at Moda Center, and we could fix it, but you lose a national TV slot, or you're forced to play with an uneven court, right? And so both Texas and NC State decide they're gonna just play because they don't wanna give up the exposure, the attention, the possibilities of what it means to be in that national slot. So when we think about growth, we can think about the numbers of butts and seats. We can think about the growth that feels really good, but I also want us to measure this too. And think about this. Coach Schaefer says, this would never happen in the men's game. What does that mean for us to have these conversations? We should have them. Let's do it. So with that, thank you so much. I'm really excited for this combo.
Well, thank you so much. You see why she's brilliant? Okay. So I want to start by, I love hearing you talk about basketball. And I think that we have seen in the last decade or so explosion in scholarship on sports and labor. And a lot of that can look at college sports, we look at football, we look at a variety of sports. But also every time you talk about why you chose to study basketball, I think it's actually really essential to this project, that this sport also provides a lot of windows for examining all the kind of contours of things that you do. So can you start by talking about how you view the sport of basketball and why this is what pulled you in to seeing a lot of these themes that you're looking at?
Yeah, so one thing that we know in the sports studies literature, lots of beautiful work on soccer, like the beautiful game, right? I'm not a soccer girly. I love it from afar, but I don't know it well. But there's ways that we immediately kind of think of soccer as this global phenomenon, global sport. There's a lot of amazing work that my work is really indebted to. But I know basketball way better, and I love it. And as I mentioned, I started going to W games, and I was like, there's a lot here. There's a lot to unpack. And then I had only worked in media. I had never worked for a team. I had a brief stint with UT Athletics, but I ran like the scoreboard. Like, I'm not gonna say that I knew the inner workings of anything on that front. So I knew about broadcast media, broadcast journalism. I worked on both the content and the technical side of that space. But I didn't know anything about working for a team, let alone a W team. And so before I felt comfortable asking questions in that space, I kind of needed to see it. And so I worked for a whole season. I worked both in the offices and I worked every home game of that 2015 season. Was not a great season for the Sparks, I will say. It was not. Candace Parker didn't play like half the season. They won a championship the next year. I was like, that should have been my year. I worked there. But I started interviewing people that worked in the front office of the team, the folks that do sales and service, folks that do group memberships. These are like the unsung heroes, right, where they're getting folks in. The people that do the game production, right, that bring the folks in, that do the anthem, all this stuff. So I just started asking people questions, asking them if I could interview them, and asking them what it's like to sell women's basketball. Their answers then, and I kind of in the book with that kind of starting period, are very different than how they might answer that now. There are new concerns, new questions. And when I think about even OG fans like that are now experiencing these price hikes, right? That's also about a growing pain. The folks that have, it's like, yes.
Because every time we go to the game, we're like, remember when people didn't come to these games?
Yeah.
And they were $5 tickets?
Yeah, so the tough thing is we want this growth. We want people to get their coin. We want the people that are both working behind the scenes. We want the athletes, the coaches. We want them to get their due. We want big broadcast rights. But I also think about accessibility, right? When professional sport and even college sport is so hard to go see. If you want to take your family, there's the cost of parking, 4 tickets, 4 hot dogs. Like, so I think part of it is that we have to have those tough questions of like, we want this growth, but at what cost, right? And then the question I always have when we come back to things like collective bargaining, I really love talking about organizing. You should organize, start a union, disrupt things wherever you are. But one of the things as someone that is a member of a union that I learned about labor is like, what does it mean we come together? It means that we're gonna have moments, I don't know if folks heard when Courtney Williams is talking, if you've seen 144, you know this moment of like, we also have to disagree with each other, right? And so basketball had all those tensions for me that I really needed at the time. And so basketball kind of found me, these sites, as I mentioned, I didn't have them predetermined. They were really like, this is where I feel like I should go, right? And we'll see what's going on there. I was going to there were so many places I went that I don't write about because I just need to sit in the space and figure it out. If you do ethnographic work, if you do interviews at all, sometimes you got to go through a lot of them before you find the good stuff. And so I had to sit and just learn and watch. And so basketball gave me a great space. I think the demographics of the sport, of the fans, all of that gave me a really rich space where I also felt really held versus someone that has worked in other sports and other spaces that I felt way less held, way less nurtured, cared for. I mean, people were letting me stay in their homes. I was like helping people with grad work. Like, I mean, it's just like we built a community in a way that people cared for me. I was able to care for other folks. And so basketball in general is the sport. I think it has the same kind of weight. It is an international sport that has all these ramifications for politics, for labor, for media in a way that I think is really vibrant. And I'm grateful that it exists.
Absolutely. And Imani, we're so happy to have you on this panel with us. And I would love for you to give everybody kind of a rundown of your journey with basketball. I want everybody to know that Imani got back from China 4 days ago, 5 days, I don't know what day it is, like 3 days ago. And we also shuffled this event because you're now going to Puerto Rico for the World Cup. Yeah, so there's lots of things going on, but obviously we know that you played here, but can you also take us through your relationship to the game and your journey with it?
Yeah, so I'm probably one of the first basketball legacies. My mother was the second pick in the first WNBA draft. To this day, she is still the only WNBA player to have a daughter in the WNBA and a son in the NBA. And so the basketball was pre-written for me. My younger sister is Courtney Stafford. She plays volleyball here. She didn't want to play basketball. She's actually quite terrible at basketball. But yeah. So my father also played in college. His sister was a college coach my entire life, but she also played in WNBA. So basketball, I grew up in a gym. Before I knew I wanted to play basketball, my family knew I was going to play basketball. I also was 6'5" at 13, which kind of helped hurry that along. But I came here, I graduated in 2016, and I was a part of Karen Aston's class. We went from winning our first Big 12 game in January, my freshman year, to making it to the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight my senior year. And we did a lot of groundwork and kind of bringing Texas back to national notoriety, even though we didn't get any wins, but we did our best. I love the University of Texas. I credit it for saving my life. I got to do a lot of things while I was here, both on and off the court. I was drafted in 2016 to Chicago in WNBA as a 10th pick. I played for Chicago, Atlanta, and Dallas during my time in the WNBA. When COVID happened and we had a bubble season, I went to law school. I didn't think we were going to have a season. Of course, we ended up having a great season, but I started law school. I'm now a barred attorney in Missouri. I still play professionally. I've played in Australia, Lebanon, Israel, Turkey, China, Angola, Mexico. I'm probably forgetting one, but I've done my fair share of overseas basketball. I literally just got back from playing in China. I recently was naturalized, so I'll be a part of the Puerto Rican national team, and we're trying our best to get to 2028 Olympics in LA. And basketball has given me everything I've had in this life, from close friends to opportunities. And as I'm older, at 31, now I can kind of look back and see those things. I say that sport is a vehicle. You go as far as it takes you, and you make sure you pack up that trunk as you go. And I've done my best to do that. I think it's just given me so much more. I am a survivor of sexual violence. I'm also bipolar, and so basketball has given me a mic to talk about these things on a national scale and an international scale. I've been able to go to the UN and talk about women in sports and have those conversations and talk about how relevant it is for young girls to play any sport. But obviously I'm a little partial to basketball. But the intangible things you learn through sport as a woman, specifically for me, being able to travel to different countries and seeing, I played in Saudi Arabia, there we go. And just see the difference of intercommunication in both women and men and how those societies move and change. I just realized how much I've gained from sport.
Absolutely. And Imani, you've always been very outspoken on a variety of topics. You started to name some of them. And Courtney, I know that part of this project, what was a central importance of yours was to center athlete voices, which oftentimes in critical sports studies, there's a lot of talk about athletes, but there's not necessarily their voice at the center of the page. What has it meant to you, and why was that such an important thing to make sure athletes' voices were central to this project? And for you, Imani, after that, piggybacking off of that, what has your journey been as an outspoken athlete, as somebody who's refused to shut up and dribble, who's like, actually, I have a lot to say, and how have you navigated like the responses to having a voice?
You want to go first? No? I was trying to center athlete voice.
Recent, like embodied practice here. There you go.
For me, I started with that story about Sierra because it's like the way that my mind is constantly blown, right? Whether I'm watching athletes, just the amount of organization, time management. There's like, when you talk about all those skills you learn, right? It's like, if you hire an athlete, you're getting someone that has to think ahead, that's going to be able to think on their feet. And so watching athletes think on their feet, and I can use the Russia example or France, but even just from jump, right? How many athletes have told me, I had to think about all of these things. I had to lay out my life. So maybe the route does take you there, but you have to at least start with a game plan. And so even watching, you know, there are things that we know, right? So I was like, okay, going overseas, my reference point is like love and basketball, because this is a lot of invisible labor, right? You're not sure what's going on. You know your favorite athletes aren't around after the W season ends. You don't get to see them. But if y'all laugh, because some of y'all know where I'm going. But in the 2000 film Love and Basketball, Monica goes to play in Spain. And there's an iconic scene where she's in the locker room and the coach is delivering this very like, you know, so I talk about this scene in the book where he's like over the top and he's like saying all these things and he's saying the whole pregame speech in Spanish. And in the corner, we just see Monica taping her own ankle. And I think
like, what do you say?
Yeah. So at the end, one of the Spanish teammates comes over and she's like, you know, Luisa, what did he say? And she's like, he says, hand the ball to you, right? So you weren't part of any of that pregame speech or strategy, but yet you're asked to be the one that wins the game. And it feels, when you watch that, everyone always laughs at this scene, right? But then you watch it in real time. Like I watched an athlete taping her own ankle and also being expected to be the best offensive and defensive player because she was an American and she was paid to be the star. It doesn't matter what your actual position is. It's just about, we paid you to do this, so you have to be the best player, even if you are not on a well-coached team, even if you have the worst teammates around you that do not know what they're doing with their bodies. It's like this expectation, if you win, we won, but if you lose, you lost this game. And so I saw the film, but it's something to see it in real life and then ask someone how they feel about it. It's something to see a timeout where they're all speaking Russian and they're just scribbling, and you just have the Americans sitting back like, I don't know, I guess someone will hand us the ball, I guess. But you have this short time where you have one player that's trying to do a quick translation, but 30-second timeout, 60-second timeout, like it's such a fast amount of time. So that intelligence, that kind of mobility, and the way that like players have to think about the social, cultural differences, navigating all of that, and then being far from home, your loved ones. Like, there's nothing I could write about that from afar. I could maybe analyze the Love and Basketball scene, but there's something about asking athletes, like folks that are like on grainy Wi-Fi, that are spending time when they have 2 practices that day, they're giving me an hour of their time. That's huge. That's the world to me. And so I'm really humbled by the folks that were willing to be up in their bonnet. We both are in our bonnets, just like talking. There's something about that I'm really humbled that folks were willing to share things, sometimes really traumatic stuff. I understand why people don't want to do ethnographic, right? It costs money, it takes a lot of time. It's hard to explain where your time is going if you don't have something tangible. But I could not imagine this project without it. There's only so much media I can analyze without being able to go a bit deeper.
Yeah. And I was just thinking when you were talking about that scene, the thing that always strikes me about it too is like when Monica gets to Spain, her hair is like very cute, like cuter than she had in most of the movie. And I was like, where'd you get your hair done though? Like, and so, right, exactly. And so, Imani, like one of the things that you have this part in the book, Courtney, where when you're laying out all the different labors that people perform on this international circuit, and you talk about literally modifying your style of play, and how many players will say, as an American, like this is what I would do if I was in this place, but if I were in this league, in this country, I have to change literally how I move, how I play the game, what style of play I do, and having that kind of knowledge as well. And so, Imani, I would love to hear what were some of the things that you learned as you navigated all these different places that you just named, or even the kind of hidden difficulties. What do you wish people knew about being overseas? Like, where do you get your hair done, down to, does it feel like, are there places that you prefer to play where you felt like there's something here that feels supportive or feels like it's giving me something, whereas like there's places that you're like, when do I? You had a countdown going for the last
I
few
did.
weeks.
Yeah, so I think, for one, if anybody that knows me, when I'm home, I am not touching this head someone else is. I do not do my own hair. It's not a gift that I was given, but overseas, I have no choice. So, like, I've been a pro maybe 10 years technically, but since I took the break, 7 or so. Yeah. And, like, I can now cornrow my own hair. Like, still can't part to save my life, but I can do enough to get through. And, like, I never would have been able to develop those skills, or had to, if I didn't play overseas, because when you're overseas, it's you. And, like, you can't even find your hair products most of the time. Like, you got to bring that with you, specifically being a Black girl with black hair. And so, like, that is both a fun part and a frustrating part. Or you have a teammate that knows how to do hair, and she's going to do yours for you, too. And it also depends on where you're at. Like, because in some places, like, we can always find an African community. In Lebanon, I added Lebanon to the list. In Lebanon, I found an African community. When I was in Beijing, I found an African community. And so normally I can find one of those and I let them do my hair and stuff like that. But it just depends on where I'm at. Yeah. Do I have the time to go find and kind of explore? I was recently in China, and I was in a very small city in China, 2 hours from the airport. It was terrible. I hated it. And I love China. That is my favorite place to play, because it is a fast season. Yeah. At most, it's 5 months. During a world championship year, like this year, it's like 2.5 months. It's great money. And, like, I'll go home and be fine. Yeah. Like, I do my time and I go home, bring a lot of books, and it's great. But this year was a little harder just because the coach did not like me for whatever the reason was. So, like, being in China, not having a lot of food options, being by myself for the most part, and not playing basketball, wrap this up. Yeah. Wrap it up. It's cool. But I think for me, I'm not particularly the most social person. So overseas was always good for me because I love to travel. I love to read. I get to travel the world for free, throw some books in my bag, and I get to read for 3-4 months and enjoy myself. Yeah. But for people that are very social, it's very hard because they want to talk to people. They want to be able to go out. They want to be able to go socialize. And depending on what country you're in, like in China, there is no socialization because we play every 3 days. The travel days are really long and arduous. And you don't, now this was the first season that everybody could have 3 players. But for the most time I would chime in China, you had 1 foreign player. Everybody else spoke Chinese. Yeah. And if the Chinese players don't like you, they'll pretend they don't speak English the whole season. So, like, it's very isolating in that regard. And then you're there for Christmas, you're there for New Year's, all these big moments. And when I was younger, I loved it. I loved to travel. I brought my books. I didn't care. Now that I'm older, I miss moments. Yeah. I think now I'm like, wow, my little brothers are growing up. Like, I can't go see my little sister play games. You know what I mean? Like, my grandmother's older. And so now I feel it. Yeah. It's not as easy anymore. So now I'm very, like, I need to see a check. Right. Like, it's not, there are no experiences anymore. Like, no. Like, what are we doing? Yeah. So it's definitely hard in that regard. And I think because it's something that you hear about, people don't really understand, like, the mental toll for that. Absolutely. And then on the flip side, I'm a woman. Yeah. So I do want to have a family at some point. I have lost so many relationships due to proximity. Mm. Like, that man is not waiting on me. Like, I understand, this is what you got to do, but we might have been vibing and rocking out, and then I go overseas for 3-4 months. Yeah. And as much as he wants to, like, his life is still going, and I think that's one thing you learn as well. Like, just because you're not there doesn't mean the world stops. Right. All these people are still growing, they're still moving, they're still doing things, and as much as you want to be involved, you don't want to blow somebody up every day at 9 a.m. or 11 p.m. Yeah. Like, and so, like, maintaining these relationships and these familial bonds is very hard because like, it's a life. Yeah. You know what I mean? And you also don't want to be a burden to people because they're already nervous that you're overseas. Like, when I played in Israel, my dad, I was actually supposed to go back to Israel. I played in Israel in 2016. We were still in a war, but people didn't care back then. Nobody cared about the war back then. Now we suddenly care, but back then nobody cared. They were still in the same war, but all right. Yeah. So I got an offer 2 years ago, and my family was like, you can't go. We don't care. Like, you're not going. We don't care how much money it is. And they wouldn't let me go, so I didn't go. And so even navigating those things, like, I never played in Turkey. I played in Turkey for, like, 3 weeks, and I quit and went home. Yeah. But, like, the next season, like, I had teammates that were there, and they were at that club that just got bombed, and they had just left and things like that. When I was in Lebanon, we had to go stay underground in our weight room for 3 hours because there was a bomb threat. Like, these are real things that happen, and because we are very much first world, quote unquote, we don't see the wars we're in. We don't feel those things. And then you go to these other countries and they feel these things and they actually experience it. So it's just a lot to take in, and it is a very high price to pay for financial freedom, or to live a different life.
Yeah, to work. You also mentioned, like, part of what you're doing when you're navigating that, you're also doing it as a Black woman. And central to your analysis in this whole book, Courtney, is centering the experiences, particularly of Black women, navigating this labor market. How do you see race and gender operating here, both in terms of the way labor is valued, as well as the experiences people have in terms of safety, in terms of these things like what communities do you find, what stereotypes are you navigating in different places? How are those analytical frameworks guiding this work as well?
Yeah, I think one tangible example, the first thing that came to mind was when I was in Russia, there were 2 Americans on the team, and they could have 3 foreign players on their team. And 2 of them were American, and one was from Montenegro. And so there was, one of the Americans was white, one was Black. And when I interviewed the white professional basketball player from the United States, she just felt so ostracized. She was like, the Russians won't talk to me. They won't hang out with me. And she had played in Germany previously. Her family was German. The coach spoke English. She felt like wholly kind of integrated and held, and it was cute. And she comes from playing in Germany and having this great experience going to Russia. And she's like, I'm such an outsider. I'm so othered. And I was like, oh, interesting. There's just something. Meanwhile, I'm with Sierra, and Sierra is everyone's favorite player. Like, she has learned she has spent a lifetime learning how to navigate all these social situations. She's had to make the best of really bad situations. And so she's not expecting special treatment. She's like, I'm gonna have to make friends. These are players where we're coming in, taking people's spots. They're gonna feel away. But like, how can I do this? They want Sierra to go out with them. They're like, we're going out, Sierra, come with us. And so I saw these dynamics of like, if you have been othered, if you've experienced racism and sexism together, you have enough background experience to navigate these spaces in a particular way, right? And it wasn't that it wasn't difficult for her, but she was like, I gotta be here. So how am I gonna make the most of the situation? She's the most outspoken leader on the team. She's the person everyone can rely on. She's the person people can go to for advice. And so I think about that of like, what are the life skills that like these particular athletes have had to navigate? But also I think about how are they mediated, right? What are the differences in how they are talked about on ESPN, right? Who's getting the features? Who's getting the special? Who's winning the NCAA awards, right? Who are the writers voting for? And so when I write about, one Final Four game that people may have watched between Iowa and LSU, it's very tangible. We were there, Amira and I were there together, and we could feel it
We literally had.
We had
very
Iowa,
aggressive Iowa fans.
Yeah.
Right here.
And so it was like, everyone is talking about the "you can't see me" like on the internet. But when we were at the game, that was like not even something that anyone was talking about inside of the arena. It wasn't until we left that we're like, oh, people are big mad about that. It was like this glimpse, but the energy in there, the dynamics, the demographics, everything that was happening in there was like the most fascinating thing. And so when I think about how folks have to navigate recruiting, how they have to navigate NIL, transfer portal, how they have to navigate, it's starting earlier and earlier, like these questions of navigating your labor. And the folks that have had to do that in a particular way are the folks that are most marginalized in a general societal way. And so I like learning from them, like how are you navigating? And so it can be hair products, that is a conversation we have, but it's also about perceptions of Blackness internationally, right? Where there's someone in the front office of the Russian team that I interview, and she says at one point, Black people are lazy. And I was like, okay, maybe something's lost in translation. I was like, let me rephrase the question. But she volunteers this. That wasn't a question. Are Black people lazy? That was not the question. But she goes into this whole thing about she had dated, and this is a Russian woman who had dated one of the Black players on the men's professional team that shares a gym. And she talked about how all he wanted to do was stay inside, watch TV, like on his non-practice and game days. He was just in the house watching TV, like at home, on the computer, on social media. And I said, okay, I think maybe he was depressed, but I was like, hey, what makes you, I was like, tell me more about, let me rephrase this, but she says this as this generalization. These are people that make decisions about who gets to play, who actually gets a contract. And so I was like, tell me more about this. And so as I asked more questions, she's like, okay, like he was a leading scorer on the team. Like he did all this stuff. Maybe he wasn't lazy. She's like, I was like, was he lazy in practice? Was he not racking balls? I was like, what was happening? She's like, no, he was great on all the fronts. He just was in the house. He didn't want to go out. And I was like, oh, well, there's a lot of reasons. That's probably not. She's like, oh, okay, well, he wasn't lazy. But I was thinking about that mindset and that jump to that, about these other perceptions and stereotypes that are about physicality, about your style of play, what you're supposed to be able to do, even if nothing about your previous experience has shown that you are that type of player. They're like, no, you're black, you can probably do that. Right. And so the ideas that are both about either superstardom and incredible athleticism or perceptions about, this kind of blackness as pathology kind of understanding. Both of them are very much active that I've seen, but I'm curious.
And I can tell you the other thing we should layer in there is sexuality.
Yeah.
And what safety looks like, but also presentation and assumptions about gender conformity and what that looks like globally as well.
Yeah.
So I forgot that we should do that. Okay.
I think that's one of the biggest things is perception.
Yeah.
Specifically when you're in places where no one speaks English. Like in China, I'm speaking through a translator. And so one, if you have a good translator versus a bad translator, those are huge things because I've had a translator where my coach is going off and he's saying something, and I'm coming back like da-da-da, and I'd say, just say okay. And she can read through that and filter all my frustration and be like, she said okay, she'll be better. And then I've had other translators where he's been talking for 10 minutes and she turns to me and says, I think you need to rebound better. We was over there for 10 minutes. Like, he just did a whole monologue. Right. Like, what did he say? And so it's very much like you can lose a lot. Even like this past season, my coach said I had a bad attitude. So I asked my teammate, I'm like, hey, has my attitude changed? Because I know like my minutes have changed. Maybe I don't know. And she's like, no, you just kind of seem a little more reserved than you were when you first got here. But you probably just want to go home. Like, you're just kind of sick of it. But that was recorded as, oh, Imani has an attitude. Even though during the games, I'm still cheering for everybody. I'm still smiling. I'm still jovial. But now it's been recorded that way, and that's how it's read, right? And even being comfortable, like when I played in Saudi Arabia, the idea we've been given in terms of how they deal with women is very different than the actual reality. Most of those women there have never been yelled at in their entire life, let alone by a man. The team I had that year, we had a male coach who was Lebanese, and he yelled. That's all he did was yell. My teammates could not function because they'd never been yelled at by a man. They got him fired because they were like, we don't do that here, right? Like, and it's like, I'm like, bro, we just playing basketball. Like, you get yelled at, but that's something that they, in their culture, they've never experienced before. And so, like, navigating how you talk to people. Like, I have a very aggressive personality. I'm very brash. I'm very blunt. I don't really mince words a lot. And I have to change that when I'm in different environments because that's just not how it works. In Australia, they're going to talk to you for 10 minutes and say something they could have said in 2. Yeah. They're very polite people. They're going to, and I'm just like, bro, okay, you want me to, I got it. Like, okay, my bad. But like,
you don't mind.
They're not direct people. So I had to be like, okay, cool. Let me like, actually I didn't. I got fired from there because I didn't figure it out. But that was my fault. But just navigating like cultural differences, is very different. And even me being like a black woman and being very outspoken, which isn't necessarily something I learned in my home, but it's just something I've always come to do. Like, that's not received well in different places because they're just not used to that.
Absolutely. So I want, before we get to the Q&A, to ask you about the process of doing this work. I saw a lot of this up close, and it's funny because once I started reading your book, I was like, you were doing work there? I thought we were hanging out. I thought we were chilling, and now it's a whole chapter. That's wild. You were like really working. But you not only did this work for so long, but you're bringing theory, you're bringing methods in motion, you're bringing methods on a budget and a pandemic. And you also are at all these different sites, and you're trying to bring together, and you do very successfully, a cohesive narrative that is just like absolutely a blueprint for thinking through sports as labor, thinking through global media markets, thinking through how identity is mediated through all those things. But it's probably a bitch to do. And weave together, and especially for folks who are thinking through projects, thinking through wrestling with big ideas and want a model of how you then make that a thing, make that a book, make that a project. What has your process been like? How have your methods evolved? And especially, I'm a historian. New things happen and I'm like, cool, I'm chilling in the archive. But as you were finishing this, like you said, it felt like basketball was rapidly, like the media around it was rapidly changing. We not only had the Final Four that you got to sneak into the book, but like you said, then we had new leagues and we had new narratives that were like exploding every day. And you're trying to finish a book that needs to stop and go, but it feels like you also had like a whole new world unfolding in front of you that was maybe not as new as we think. But how do you think about your work and your process?
Yeah. So I'll answer the last part about like timing, and everyone's like, oh, it's so great this book came out because like women's basketball is having this moment. And I was like, oh, well, the book covers back to 2015. So part of it is like trying to center for folks that are coming into the space and are like, yes, I'm ready. Give me all the things. I'm like, great. Here's a great background of here's what you missed. Here's where we've been.
Here's what you missed on Glee.
Yeah. But at the end, so I had this piece called Overtime because I did the 4 and there was like, there's more, there's always more. Every day there was something new and I was just like bookmarking everything. And so if you read Overtime, don't read it first, it's chaotic because it's like, and another thing. And I have also noticed, and if we continue, so it's like, these are all the things and there can be more of that. I want more people to be doing this work. But it is hard to not be a prisoner of the moment. Historians are so great of giving us context. And so I learned so much from folks that are like, no, this moment has other moments before it. And so I tried to find those touch points. So I'll talk about process. This was part of my dissertation. The dissertation looks very different. Also, don't look it up. No one wants their dissertation to be read. It was a document in process.
That's why you embargo it.
Yes, hide it forever. And so my dissertation looked very different. The questions I was thinking about, FIBA had a ban on the hijab, right? That's a chapter. And that ban gets lifted, but it tells us a lot, right? About what was going on, who could play, who could not play, and how that was keeping athletes from actually both playing on FIBA, IOC level, but these big bans also trickle down to, I'm talking about high schools in DC, right? Of telling high school girls they can't play because they wear hijab, right? So I was asking different questions. I was covering like women's empowerment campaigns in the W, like we've moved beyond some of these things, but they set a tone of like, I know the process is getting into a space, observing it, asking questions. That's kind of the general thing. If you're a journalism major, it's not that different. But the theory is part of like the voice and being like, well, why is this happening? What can this tell us about other things? So process was messy. Part of the 10 years is about my inefficiency. I'm sure someone else could have done this book in 2. But for me, I had to really sit and think. And as I mentioned, I thought I had something and then 2020 hit. And for so many of us, that really ruptured things that I was talking to someone today. They said there are parts that are just so irreversible. And so how this book that felt so obsolete in 2020, I was like, maybe I throw the whole thing away. I got to find a new site of study. And I just had to sit with it. And I think the Wubble gave me something of like, what are folks able to do? I'm talking about folks moving around the world. What happens when we can't move, when we can't be in community with each other? What can we imagine instead? And having to imagine and think on the fly, which is not about just all of a sudden, this is like very much a Rosa Parks. Like, it's not like someone was just tired. It was like, this is all the classes folks were in, all the activism they were already doing, the organizing already around the Players Association. And so I was like, oh, I read a lot about, a lot of law reviews will talk about collective bargaining. And I was reading that, but I was like, there's something about what the players are saying and what they're fighting for. And so you helped me think about this book moving in and out of time and in and out of places. And so it didn't feel disjointed. And then the last thing I'll say about writing voice is that I come from a journalism background. I moved into academia. I didn't plan it that way. And I was always told that I had a very journalistic voice. And I've been doing journalism longer than I have been doing academia, which is still true. And so I was very insecure about my writing voice, of being considered basically too basic, right? And so I felt like if I don't use big words, if I don't keep saying the ways in which or epistemology, ontology my way through it, that I won't be taken seriously. And I really struggled. I don't want the book to be painful. I want people in the industry to read it. I want my participants to read it. I want my mama to read this. And so I think part of it was like, what am I willing to give up and who is my audience, right? And I didn't want to write from a defensive standpoint. I talk about the crossover. I have so much love for this as a move. Whenever a crossover happens, I gasp. Like I clutch my pearls. And I didn't want to just be like, I'm decentering the dunk. It's part of that. That's part of it. But I think I was writing from a defensive, like, I care about this so much and other people should too. And then it kind of switched at some point to a love letter of who I wanted to write about or who I wanted to think through. And so this is, again, a 10-year process. I can save you so much time. Like, please email me. I can cut you through the mistakes that I made. But I think I had to do it this way. Maybe the next books, to keep my job, I think I have to write them faster. She said, what jobs? Okay, that's a different question too on a journalism and an academic front that we can absolutely talk about. But I think I wish I could say it was this beautiful process that I knew, but every site I went to, sometimes I just go to USA Basketball stuff. They have this Women in the Game series. I would just go to them and just sit in the back and just see what people were talking about, right? And so I think I'm also not a social person, but I do like just watching people. Like, I'm a people watcher. And I think one of the things that I love is that I've been lucky to be in a lot of really cool gyms, spaces, rooms where people much smarter than me were talking and were nice enough to give me some of their time. And so I love that I got to do this. I sometimes feel like a scammer and like, I go watch basketball. But I think it has been nice to have these spaces that were both like fulfilling to me personally, but also professionally. And then I had to write the book at some point in a timely manner to keep my job, to get tenure. And so I needed that deadline because I would say, oh no, there's an unrivaled. I tried to pitch a Olympic chapter. I was like, I need to go to Paris. I got to write about 3-on-3. Sierra made the 3-on-3 team and I was like, this is perfect. And they were like, if you don't turn the book in. So anyway, to keep my contract, I was like, okay, no Olympics chapter. But I think there are still those spaces and I hope other people take this mantle up and kind of go into these spaces and write about them. I kind of want to just enjoy women's basketball now. I've been very torn about leaving the field at such a vibrant time, but I really just want to be a fan now. That's where I'm at. So I'll keep talking about this book. I'm excited about it. But yeah, I kind of almost have to find another field site because I don't want it to be ruined. I think that's always a threat that I think some of us may feel in our work is that if we're writing about something we love, at some point the labor of it kind of takes away, and I kind of just want to enjoy the sport. I know it's not great timing with the book. You're supposed to be doing that. But I really want to enjoy LSU Texas tonight and not be like, another chapter.
And she says enjoy, but if you've ever watched Texas sports with Courtney, I don't know how enjoyable it's not enjoyable till the game's over and they've won.
Yeah. So, and either way, I'm like, you see that fourth quarter? What were we doing back there? And like, nothing's good enough. Any Texas sport, any sport, I'm equally stressed.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask one last question to Imani, but after that, we're going to go to a Q&A. So if you have questions, start thinking them and get ready to come up to the mic so we can transition right to that. I want to ask you what it feels like to have a book like this be about the work you do. Like, I feel like it's just interesting to me because, you have this relationship with the athletes, but then also you said it's a love letter in many ways. And I think it also is making sure there's such respect for the value of the labor that you're performing and the visibility of saying this is not only worthy of study, this is like really important. And I think that I know we talk about timing a lot, but whenever it came out, it was gonna be a time because it's been in motion. The game's been developing since 1891. So, and like for you in this moment, Imani, with new leagues popping up, as you're still moving around, and to be able to have a conversation where there's a book like centered on seeing like this labor that you do, how are you taking stock of the basketball world? Are you still finding ways to love the game? Are you tired? Are you interested about any new development? How are you feeling about basketball in general in this moment that we're in?
Yeah, I think you just said something very poignant, and I think most of us as athletes feel that way. The labor versus the love. We started doing this because we love the game. And there are very much times where the job can feel overwhelming, or I'm like, do I still love doing this? Like, right, when I'm running my 13th sprint in some random country and I'm tired and my paycheck is late and I miss my grandma, do I still want to do this, right? And we have those moments. And then something happens and we remember like, okay, the world isn't ending. Okay. For me specifically, because I did take the break from basketball, it was different because I thought when I put it down to go to law school, like I said I was coming back, but I was like, I'm cool. Like I thought I was done. I thought I was like, I've done it all. I'm happy with where I'm at. And I missed basketball so much. Like I was watching all the games. And I was just like, I'm better than that person. But like, so it was half ego, but half like I didn't realize how much I really loved doing it, how much I really loved being in it. And I had to kind of fight my way back into being a professional player. And now, in this time, like it's so funny because I was with the same agent until I took my break. And when I came back, I got a new agent. But he had also known me my entire career. And it was funny because he was trying to pitch me to people. And because I was kind of in a different era, like my year, drafted 2016, I played with Cappie Pondexter, Elena Deladon, Tamara Young, Erica DeSouza. These are like legendary names. I was the only rookie on the team, right? I was in this room full of, at the time, Elena Deladon and I had just won MVP, right? Like I met her and was shaking, like it was crazy. And we made it all the way to semifinals that year, and I was playing in LA versus Candace and Nneka Ogwumike of the LA Sparks, where I grew up watching, had my entire church there, everybody, right? And it was such a crazy experience for me because it was probably the first time I felt like, oh, I'm really a pro. Playing in Staples, growing up as an LA kid is insane. But in the same regard, because I played in that era, people think I'm way older than I am. So coming back to basketball, they're like, she played with Cappie Pondexter. Like, what do you mean? He wanted to get a training camp contract. She's 40. I'm like, whoa, buddy. But I played with all of these legends. Like, I think that was the fun part for me because I came into basketball before Candace retired, played DT, played Sue Bird, like played Sylvia Fowles, Rebecca Brunson, Lindsay Whalen. Like I played the greats. Like I got a chance to be on the court with these phenomenal players, but I was such a baby, right? And so now, as we've seen the WNBA grow, because like again, we all talking about, remember when people didn't come to games? I was playing in that time where I would be walking around Chicago and they'd be like, wow, you should play in the WNBA when you grow up. I'd be like, I do, crazy.
Fun fact.
Oh my gosh. And it's even like Chicago, right? Yeah. Chicago, when I played, we played in Rosemont, which was an hour from like city of Chicago. Now they play in downtown Chicago and like people can walk around and be like, oh, the WNBA, right? And so seeing the growth from me, both as a player and a fan, because I'm still very much invested as a fan, and watching them have these conversations where I'm not necessarily in the room, but I'm adjacent to the room, it's been amazing to witness. And in terms of like, I think that when I started talking and speaking about all these things and being so, oh my gosh, I was just a knuckleheaded kid who had a lot of opinions and a big mouth. I didn't necessarily know like what the landscape was. And like we're in this bubble of women's basketball now, and we're seeing, and I think the biggest thing about women's basketball, which we've been able to see, is the growth of social media. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right? Because when I was coming up, like the only WNBA player that kind of crossed into regular life was Skylar Diggins. Mm-hmm. And Skylar worked very hard to do that. Yeah. Like that was Skylar's whole purpose, right? She started that in college, and that was her thing. Like, I am more than a basketball player. I'm a pretty girl. I'm this, I'm that. She started making that lane for herself before social media was what it was. And now we see the young kids and NIL, like they're doing that. That is something that comes before them. And when we were in the WNBA, we had to kind of fight to get people to pay attention. Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily because the product was bad. It was because we just didn't have the eyes. And how do we create the eyes? We didn't have social media. We didn't have somebody, I follow her on Twitter and I talk to her and I da-da-da. We had like real life, I came to the game. You know what I mean? So it's been amazing to watch it. And I think just seeing where it goes and having people that care about it and put voices first, and specifically Black voices, right? Because we've seen, again, with the growth of social media, allowing Black voices to take the forefront, but we've seen how media has purposely, non-purposely, conveniently moved around. Like the bubble season, the Sports Center activism of the year, right? In the year where we're talking about say her name and a Black woman, was Breonna Stewart. And Breonna is an amazing ally, don't get me wrong.
Breonna was also like,
Yes.
She was like, wait, are we sure?
You know,
Time magazine? Are we positive?
In a year where we're talking about the erasure of Black women in a predominantly Black league, the person that gets the activism award was a white woman. You know what I mean? So we've had these conversations over and over. And even with Caitlin Clark, like Caitlin is an amazing player, but was she the first one that was that amazing? Yeah. You know what I mean? And like that's not to denigrate anything she's been able to do, because we appreciate the eyes, but she's galvanized people that never wanted to like us. Yeah. And that's amazing. but we've seen kind of the juxtaposition of like, where do we go from here? So as a fan, I love watching it. As a player, I hope to be a part of it again. But I think these conversations, and it's important to have these conversations and to have people that are invested both from the fan point, but also from the academic point, from the behind the scenes, because that's like what makes it a more fuller picture and more authentic, I guess would be a better way to say that.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for these beginning conversations. And we would love to open it up to questions now. By request of our esteemed author, we will take one Caitlin Clark-related question, and that is it.
Maximum. It's not required.
It's not required, but if there's one that has happened, change your question if you had another one. Okay,
And
great.
make it good. Make it good, please.
Ms. Davis, thank you for awesome panel. And this is a question about mental health in this basketball.
Yeah.
My daughter played basketball in Incarnate Word for 2 years, mid-major programs in San Antonio, leading scorer in the conference, leading scorer on the team. We get a call one night. We get a call at 6 in the morning. She's unconscious in the back of an ambulance. Away game at University of New Orleans. If that's not bad enough, nobody from the coaching staff went with her to the hospital. Come to find out she was having seizures at night we didn't know about. And the neurologist said it was probably stress. Now, basketball induced stress. Leading scorer on the team, leading scorer in the conference. But we had no idea she was under this much stress. So my question is about the black woman athlete as workhorse. When I see Roy Harmon running up and down the court for 40 minutes, can I say that? I'm tired for her. When it comes late third quarter and they just pass the ball to Madison Booker every time, like get us some buckets. And so just talk to me just about, Dr. Cox, about, how these sisters feel overseas, like you said, being the only American and you getting paid and you got to ball out. And Imani, you played here. You had high expectations on you. So,
You said it best yourself, specifically overseas, right? When you get overseas, like you're probably you are the highest paid player on the team, and that is the reality of it. You produce or you don't. I had a very quiet season in China this year. I averaged 20 minutes and I averaged a double-double, led the league in blocks in 20 minutes, and I sucked. Let them tell it terrible. What? Don't bring her back. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that comes with that heaviness, that weight, right? And as a child, I say child, college, right? You don't understand because you want to be the person. You want to be the guy. You want to hold the weight. And eventually it gets heavy. And so figuring out ways to navigate that space. And I'm very, now that I'm older, I'm going to control what you can control. I can put in the work. I can show up. I can be prepared. I can't control nothing after that. I can't control how much I play. I can't control my bucket fall today. I can only control what I can control, and I have to let it go from there. And I watch the game, and I got to let it go. I can't let it get heavy, especially overseas, because it can get dark very quickly because you don't have that family or those friends to isolate you, right? Or to disconnect. And I think that is the reality of the job, unfortunately. We sign up for that. And so as much as I can complain, I also, when I was in law school, I had a regular job. I was working at a hotel at the front desk, and I remember my first year back, our transfer was like, what were you doing last year for New Year's? Because we had just played a game on New Year's. And I was like, I was making less than $20 an hour working at a hotel. Wait a minute. You know what I mean? So I understand how privileged it is for me to complain about this being my problem when I make more than my dad does for the year in 2 months playing basketball overseas. But we all have our struggles, and you just have to figure out how to manage it because that is the job, right?
I just want to maybe talk about the mental health perspective from a couple of things I saw in Russia in particular. And I'm using that example, not to jump on Russia, but just the variety of things I've seen just in terms of wellness versus what I saw in France. In Lyon, they had Catapult, they had all the tech stuff, they had all these resources, they had nutritionists, everyone was eating lots of veggies, versus in Russia, Sierra and I were just in the grocery store, just grabbing stuff, figuring out. They had Louisiana hot sauce in Kazan, Russia, fun fact. Mental health, I just needed it, I guess, in that moment of this is a cool thing. But two things I'll notice, when you said the coaches, it made me think about, there was one player that went to a coach and was like, hey, I'm not sleeping at night. Like I can't, it's almost like jet lag. Like she couldn't sleep. They have morning practice, night practice. They're always practicing or lifting. And she was like, I'm not getting sleep and I'm worried. Like, I mean, it's an injury risk. It's like your mental, all of it. And the assistant coach tells her, drink a beer before bed. That was like have a nightcap. That'll make you sleep. You know, like this is the medical advice that's given. That insomnia could be about being homesick. It could be a mental health. It's like drink a beer before bed. Like this is the difference we're talking about. The other thing I'll say is the other player I mentioned, there was a player from Montenegro that was on the team, and her father passed away while I was there. And the team gave her 48 hours to go home and bury her father and come back. Even though there was not a game. I mean, in Russia, they practice a lot. They don't play as much as you would think. And so they have all these practices, and it was like they were requiring her to come back before there was even a game. And so for her to leave, like, Kazan's a pretty big city, but like leave from there, go bury her father, come back, and they were like, or you have to pay the penalty. And sometimes these penalties are like $20,000. I mean, it's like to break your contract, right? And then at the same time, so there's both like when she comes back, you know, like the team had got stuff, you know, like prepared all this stuff for her, had it set up in the locker room. Everyone was so upset. And no one, like I think maybe Sierra had gone to the front, like, why can't she have a week? Why can't she have a few more days? And they're like, she needs to come back. She needs to be with the team. That's what we've paid her to do. So I think about that lack of care. And I think about, at the same time, on social media, the team posted like this picture of a candle, and they were like, we send our condolences to, and I was like, that has to do something where it's both the gaslighting of like, you posted this like in memoriam, but I can't actually go home and be there in this moment. And so I think about that, of like the financial penalty, the financial stress that folks are often under. And I think about that lack of care that is about being alone, having these moments, or people having injuries and not even wanting the team to know. Like part of it is like the different forms of non-care and how that affects your mental health, like the actual physical things where you're making decisions of like, do I need to go stateside to have surgery? Like what's going on? So I think about that lack of care, and these are like more extreme versions because folks are isolated. They also aren't the only stories. I tell a few more, and I don't necessarily put people's names in all of them because there is precarity there too. And so I want to be mindful of that. And so I think the mental health piece for college athletes, we know that gambling, I don't get on my big gambling rant, that's the next project. The impact of gambling and the things that people say online to athletes, to college athletes, to 18 to 22-year-olds, we know from the stats and the survey the NCAA put out, so we know from them, they even have to admit that that women's basketball players receive a lot of the vitriol. I think they're in the top 2 of sports, and it is always racialized, it's always gendered, it's always homophobic, like all these things where it's like, I didn't hit my parlay, so I need to get on the internet and talk about this player.
And after the last Summer Olympic Games, they did a similar survey, and they found that 83% of the hate tweets were towards Black women at the games. And so when we're talking about social media and talking about things like mental health awareness and all these things, that's like your work is showing you where that point of intersection is. And absolutely, go for it.
Hi, my name is Blair English. I'm a freshman here. Just for like math purposes, I was like 13 when COVID hit. Okay. Sorry. No, but it's related. I'm giving you.
I got you.
Because it's relating to my question.
Okay.
So I've kind of only known a world where the W is like famous.
Wow. That is beautiful.
Like, cause no, cause I don't really remember.
No, it's like.
Oh, I love this.
So my question is, were there like, as like a player and as a researcher, was there like any signs that it was gonna have this big of a boom?
Wow. So first of all, that's amazing to hear. So I was 2 when the WNBA started. So I've had a WNBA my entire life. And we had, like, I was at the game in Houston when the Comets, you don't even know what the Comets are, but when the Comets were 3-time champions, like I was there. So like I have these memories, like I was at the game that Lisa Leslie dunked. I have these memories like naturally in me because I grew up with the game, but I also have the memories of going to games and it being empty stadiums. I have the memories of playing in empty stadiums. So hearing you say like, I only know a popular WNBA is amazing to hear. And in terms of did we know it was going to happen, I think COVID was a scary thing for most professional sports, but specifically for us because we were debating whether we were going to have a season at all. And we thought like, oh my God, if we don't have a season, we may never recover from this. But what COVID showed us was, oh, people care, like we've been telling y'all. Because of COVID, they put every game on ESPN.
Yeah.
And we did historical numbers.
The only league to gain viewership during COVID was the WNBA and the National Women's Soccer League because for the first time...
They had access.
Wow, wonderful. What happens when you put things on TV?
And that had been our argument forever. So in terms of us knowing, we'd always been like, hey, if you put us on a channel that people have, I'm sure they'll watch. We sell out arenas for NCAA. You think they just die after that? Like, what happens? Mm-hmm. And so that was probably the first marker of like, hey, we're showing you that this is a real thing, and that led into the ESPN buy-in. So there was an inkling for sure. And then watching, like, people give Caitlin Clark all of that responsibility, but like Caitlin needed a villain, and they gave that title to Angel, and Angel very much ran the same course in terms of bringing us fans. And also Angel is the first. Skylar tried to do it, but Angel was the first one to be on Shade Room, to be in that pseudo celebrity conversations. Skylar is just a little bit too old for that to be a thing, just because we didn't have the same access to the internet that y'all do. And so Angel is the one that brought in like the black fans, because we've always said, ironically, our biggest demographic is black men, but we've always had that, but we've never had black women. We've never had the casual fan, and Angel did that, while Caitlin did her part with the other folks. So we probably didn't know it was gonna look like this, but we knew it was coming for sure.
And just also, these things are often secular, and so sometimes it's really easy to think like, oh, the league always looks one way and it's like a long trajectory up, but there's been booms before, right? Yeah. And so one of the things that really happens, especially with women's sport, is when it's an international competition, like the Olympics, then you have a huge interest. And one of the things that happened in the summer of '96 is the interest was so high across the board that it launched multiple professional domestic leagues for women. When it's not international competition, when it's domestic and you don't get like this very masculine like cheering for your country part of it, you see that drop off happen. And so a lot of these leagues struggled, but there were always these moment of booms. When the W first launched, right? Like, you know, Cheryl was on the cover of things and got milk commercials and things like that. And exactly. And so there's always been all of these moments of possibility. And sometimes when we look closer at what disrupted them, it was choices that people made about media packages, about the inherent value, about ownership class that actually would prefer to not have their teams make money because it interferes with them writing it off as charity. And so those are decisions that have kept, sometimes when we think about growth, like when we talk about what are these measuring sticks, a lot of those things have actually been what's at play when the product has been the same and phenomenal, where the people have been, you know, personalities that you would want to market, when all of that, the competition has always been here. And so I think the stuff like new media, social media, like these are the things that you can't predict how technology evolves, but I think the technology piece of it is a huge part of the story.
I love this question. I'm so grateful you came up and gave us that context. I didn't know. I thought you were just calling us old. So we were all like, what? No, but that context is so important. I think the only thing I'll add to their amazing comments is I was thinking COVID as a catalyst, but I was thinking about the NCAA side. So again, with 2020, you have the NBA and the WNBA competing at the same time, which the lore has always been, we can't have them both competing because no one will watch the women, or we can't have the men's and women's NCAA tournament at the same site because everyone will always choose the men. And I'm like, is that true? Let's just try. So I think one of the things we saw in 2021 with the NCAA tournaments and what we saw with the collapsing of regionals is the single site and what that brought us, right? In terms of having this side-by-side comparison. If you know where I'm going with this, we're going to Sedona Prince, right? So seeing the actual disparities up close, which is a social media thing as well, of like, there were all of these strength and conditioning folks that knew that there were those yoga mats and those little 5-pound weights. And when they went out, first they put it out before Sedona's TikTok, they were told by their universities to take it down.
Yes.
They were like, you should be grateful. The idea of being grateful is really the current, which is about keep it down, don't complain, this charity kind of understanding. And so they took it down because they were like, we want to keep our jobs. That's real. That's a real labor concern. And then when Sedona's like, nah, look at this, y'all, right? And so it became undeniable, led to the Kaplan report, right? Where you now have a firm that's investigating just how sexist.
Right.
And millions of dollars, they were like, we'd rather lose $10 million a year than to let the women's game say March Madness out loud, to use those properties. And they always like, we didn't think y'all wanted to use March Madness.
We didn't think that. Like,
we didn't think you wanted to
relevant.
make money. We were like just thinking you were
confused
vibing.
by
yeah.
this.
And so even when the Kaplan report comes out and the NCAA is reckoned with, they still don't do what they're supposed to where we have state politicians then jump in and say, you are actually in violation. Well, everyone's in violation of Title IX, let's be clear. But also, like, you have to do this, right? So this is another kind of sport and politic, these things that we're supposedly not gonna mix, right?
Yeah.
But where they advocate for the athletes in their states. And so I think about that moment in 2021 where we are inside, where we are watching these things and we're seeing this side-by-side comparison. And so people are like, wow, it's amazing what happens when we put things on ESPN Uno, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen this explosion. We've seen it in other sports, volleyball, for example. And so there's a point you make that I quote in my book about this idea that fans don't want to have to look around and search and find. Some people just turn their TVs on to ESPN. Some bars just turn ESPN on. Whatever's on is what stays on. And so when you put it on ESPN News or ESPN, do people know ESPNU is still, like when you're putting it on, ESPN Plus, all these things, when you have top 10 matchups sometimes that are relegated, and then you have 2 unranked men's teams playing, you're like, what is this?
Or when they do the high school game of the week, and you're like,
ESPN, the Ochos on, they're playing cornhole, and you're like,
that one where they like make the slide wet and you have to like run up. They
they're doing slip and slide instead of a top 10. So it's like part of it is like, do you want to make money or not? They both buy the broadcast rights and then they refuse to show them, right? Which is holding the sport hostage.
Yeah.
So we've seen these openings and these exciting things that from a media perspective, that's where my brain goes. But I think about those social media openings where people say, I don't want to just be grateful. Or we have these moments where everyone has their everyone watches women's sports shirt. But that's a response to people who are like, nobody watches women's sports, right? And now everyone has their little shirts, right? So I think about those turning tides, and I'm so grateful for your perspective because we have this certain kind of timeline we're working on, but I'm excited about a next generation that only knows this, where this is the status quo. Like this is such an exciting time.
It also came out a couple of years ago. I don't remember, you might know his name, but the executive that worked at ESPN hated the WNBA. Every time they asked somebody, he said no. And at every opportunity, he blocked the WNBA from having primetime coverage, from having media rights, everything. And he finally retired, and suddenly the WNBA gets this huge deal. And so it's also a conversation of, I always say sports are a microcosm of the real world. Sexism doesn't die because we're playing basketball today. It still exists. And those conversations in boardrooms are still happening, and there's still people in there that have sexist and anti-women views and all these backward still things we're trying to work through. Those conversations, those men are still making those decisions in those rooms.
And we'll go to your question, Joy. And also, I think one of the things that both of these things showed, the Kaplan report especially, is like a lot of these things are systemic, and that's like we need to talk about them systemically. One of the things that's most damning in the report is showed how much a school stands to earn from how far their men's team goes in March Madness. There's like a real financial benefit. And there's no, well, last year they started to sprinkle some, but until then there was no financial compensation. There was no incentive for if a women's team went further in the tournament. So then you could see how systemically AD is saying, we get a payout if our men's team gets to the Sweet 16 or the Elite 8, and our women's team could win it all, and that would do no kickback to the conference, to our school, anything like that. That's a systemic issue. Like, it doesn't have to be written like that. That's like the way, like, you don't have to not let people use the term March Madness. These are choices that people are making, but they're making them within systems that then continue to let them perpetuate. Joy, you want to ask the final question?
Hello. My name is Joy Woods Bennett, and I'm so glad this book is out. I've seen some of the story of you writing it, but my question is for everyone up here. You mentioned wanting a family. You mentioned, what that looks like. And we are seeing more and more conversations about this, with Skylar having her kid and having to deal with what was going on. My question is, we talk a lot about labor in general, but what does laboring, giving birth, whether you're a birthing person or however you identify, what does that type of labor look like in a system where your body is the labor?
I was literally just having this conversation with somebody because I was saying how fans get so upset, like when a player decides that they don't care about the team and they're going to sit out, or they're going to force themselves to trade, and they get so mad. They're so like locked into this. But like my job is literally my body. So when this coach doesn't care about me as a person, isn't worried about how they speak to me, and I'm playing through a torn meniscus, or I'm playing through a rolled ankle right now, and I'm pushing myself, and you mean to tell me you don't care about me? This is my body. Like, once I stop playing, I'm still gonna have to run with this body, walk with this body, live in this body, right? And so, yes, I am gonna be selfish. I am gonna say I don't care because they don't care about me when I get off this court. And like, people think like, oh, well, it's your job and you're working. This is literally my body. Like, this is literally, like, I'm putting myself through. I've had surgeries, right? Like, I pushed myself. And as a woman specifically, right, like, I have a childbearing age. I'm spending it playing basketball. Like, and so these conversations are something that we, like, miss when we talk about, like, my body is literally my job. So even when I'm not playing basketball, I'm conscious about what am I eating? Am I working out? There's never a time in my life where I'm not the first time in my life since I was 13 years old that I didn't work out at least five times a week was when I started law school at 25 years old. Yeah. So for that 10 years, I had worked out at least 5 times a week. Maybe more than that, right? But at least for that entire 10 years. And we don't think about these conversations because being a professional athlete means I never stop working, whether I'm playing or not, because I can't just go home and take 3 months off. I have to stay in shape. I have to continue working on my craft. And then on the flip side of that, I was in Dallas with Skylar the year that she was pregnant and working with that. And we haven't had any safeguards for pregnant or non-birthing parents, right? We haven't had a family room. We haven't had maternity leave, because how do I have maternity leave if my job is to show up and use my body? What does that look like? And so I think that is something that we really don't look at when we look at women, even with Naomi Osaka, right? Her even just speaking about trying to return to sport and having postpartum. Like, these are things that we don't navigate into real world, even though that should be a conversation in my everyday corporate job, right? That should be a conversation there. And if we, again, sports are microcosm of the real world. When we look at America's maternity leave policies, we don't have those in corporate America. Right. So of course we don't have them in sports, because that's not something we're used to. Mind you, when you go to other countries, that is something that's already baked in. And so that's definitely something that's been top of the docket in our new CBA, and something we continually talk about, because it is something that is important, and it is something that is like, in my entire health, I need to be aware of these things, and have spaces where I'm comfortable having those conversations. Like, I remember in Dallas that year, like, people were scared to go talk to the therapist because they thought they were going to talk to the front office. Yeah. Like, that was a real thing. Like, everybody had their own thing. Like, those are the real conversations that we have to have, especially when you're in a team environment in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say, maybe predictably, is that organizing is important, but also fighting for your labor rights. So we've seen folks that have fought for their labor, the double labor. And because we know that in women's sports, that pregnancy has been treated like an injury. It's been used against athletes, whether we think about brand endorsement, so not just your contract with the team, but we've also seen how your endorsements, all of these are things that have to be fought for. And so there's nothing freely given. And so part of it is when we're alerted to ways that athletes are talking about ways they've been discriminated against, where they've been cut from teams, minutes cut, even just the little snide side comments that happen are illegal. We do still have workplace protections here for now. And so one of the things that I want to think about is that relationship between the microcosm of, like, not only protections, but the extra things that folks should be asking for because it's their body, that are different than me sitting at my desk. Like, I deserve those protections too, but it is different. It should be doubly protected for that reason. And so we've seen with newer leagues coming up, I'll use AU as an example, there are different ways that the policies coming in were already better than what the W has had. Or one of the things that Nneka Ogwumike had said was, like, the the kinds of insurance and protections for the partners of NBA players were better than what W players were getting, right? And so when I think about those disparities and when those comparisons are never fun for me, because I want to talk about revenue sharing and I want to talk about all the things that are benefits that should be extended to people because they labor, I think it's really important. And so Allison Felix, I think, is a great example. Serena is a great example. Naomi Osaka. I think there's other examples in sport, but we have really good examples in the W of folks fighting back when they are discriminated against for deciding to have a family, right? Or bringing their kids into the bubble is another thing I write about, is like, that was such a blessing for a lot of folks, right? Where from a mental health perspective, people were glad that there were babies around and kids around in this such an isolating space. And so I think about the extra labor of taking care of kids on top of being in there and protesting and trying to keep everyone safe. And not having that.
My brother was in the bubble, and he brought his family, and the conversations of how his fiance was managing their one child versus mothers of two child and having no help on their side. It was night and day. But I think also the hard part about being a professional athlete is that even though we do have a labor union, if I work in corporate America, I can put in my 2 weeks, right? Like, I don't like how these things are happening. I'm gonna put in my 2 weeks, I'm gonna find another job. I don't have that same argument. And what we saw with De'Erica, even though the case was settled, we've always been scared to buck. We've always been scared. Like, I was definitely traded because they found out I was bipolar.
Yeah.
I wasn't gonna go call somebody because I'm scared. I want another job. I don't want to, so like being in a professional athlete setting is like a lot of times you can't go at the W because if I do, then now no one's gonna hire me.
Yes.
And like it's a very hard line to walk when we're talking about these things in terms of advocating for yourself, because what if I don't? What if they blackball me now, which is a very real thing. Yeah. And there's so many players that deserve to be in the league, and they did one thing and now no one offers them opportunities. So
And I'll say we've seen a lot. I actually have an article coming out on Black women in athletic motherhood this summer, so I'll send it to you. But one of the things, too, that we see is the expansion of the conversation. So it's also about bodily autonomy. Where are you having teams? Are they going to be in a state where they can access healthcare? Especially, we're talking about the dangers of labor, especially for Black women. We've lost a number of Black women athletes who have died in labor. And we know also that the maternal mortality rate for Black women in this country is terrible, and athletes serve as like really important case studies, because when you control for education, when you control for economics, that mortality rate is still there. And when you also have people who their vehicle is their body, if you have Serena Williams saying, I know my body, my lungs are clogged, I cannot breathe, right? And it's still ignored. They become very important cases in a lot of the labor movements around pregnancy protection. And we've seen that globally. We've seen that in the Women's Super League. We've seen a lot of new leagues try to address this, as Courtney was saying. Actually, Love Volleyball is a great example of a newer league that has been, from the get-go, embedded with different protections for, actually, like, there's a whole account right now that's celebrating all of the new babies of Love because of how many protections and benefits are ingrained in that league. I interviewed a lot of like the founding members of Love Austin, both UT alums, Carly and Juliet, but who are able to play volleyball here because of the protections that it gave them as mothers. And I think that's a very important part of the conversation, as well as understanding that it opens up our understanding of labor, that it's not just about the salary, it's about the flights, it's about the transportation, it's about the healthcare. And so in the last CBA, you also had that expand to fertility benefits. It was just for, exactly, and you have to be a veteran of a certain year. So it was like, when we all saw it, we were like, oh, and then you read the fine print and you're like, oh, so close, But I think those are part of the conversation. Like, what does family planning mean for queer players? What does it mean if you know you want to have a family, but you want to wait, right? You want to freeze your eggs. What does it mean if you want to come back and you're navigating that in a league that deals with it as injury? We've seen tennis have to negotiate that. And lastly, like, what it looks like at the Olympic Games. The Winter Olympics are starting tonight, right now. And on our podcast, Burn It All Down, me and Jessica were able to talk to Elena Myers-Taylor before the last Olympic Games, which were pandemic-y. And she was parenting, and the choices that people were making in both the Summer and Winter Games about what that meant. Like, you couldn't bring a breastfeed. And actually at the Final Four pandemic year too, that if you were breastfeeding a child, it counted against the allotment of people that could come into the space, right? So people ended up pulling out of the Olympics because they couldn't get to their child because they weren't allowed to bring them in. And just this past Summer Games, we had the first nursery ever in the Olympic Village because Allison has done the work to do that. And even that, it wasn't like they staffed the nursery. It was just like a space that had toys in it. But it was a start, you know? Right. But the thing that I come back to with it is the gap between that reality and then the symbol and the stories and narrative that are
They love a mom.
they
on
love
the
that.
feature. Oh my god.
They love, like, whether it's in commentary, whether it's on the cover of a magazine, whether it's whatever. And I think that gap between is where we really need to train a lot of our eyes, because it gets at the media, it gets at this. And Allison has said what it feels like to have Nike run an ad celebrating their new maternity line and like athlete moms and all this stuff, while at the same time, you know, literally docking her pay and adjusting her contract because of doing the very same things they're now turning a buck off of by advertising. And when the W started that first year and Cheryl got pregnant, she was on the cover, and if you go read those articles, they're like, she's giving birth to two things, a league and a baby. Like, there was all these rhetorics around it. And so what the reality is and what the labor aspect is in those conversations are coinciding too with this varnish that gets brought up in these very familiar narratives that want to spin inspiration tales, that want to market in a certain box, that tell us a lot about all of these things that you write about in your book, about gender, about race, about the ideas of labor, about ideas about who's valued and how you're valued and how your body's valued and by what it's doing or not. And the gap between those two things, I think, is what's very instructive. Okay, you have final words?
No, I think you did it right there.
Well, I thank you all so much again for coming out. This is just another reminder. Please go buy Double Crossover. It will continue to blow your mind. If you got a taste of it today, there's so much more packed into this book. Your independent bookstores are the greatest way.
Please don't buy it on Amazon, y'all. It's
Don't
a
do
book
it. It will
about
make
labor.
Courtney
Come
sad.
on, please, I beg.
Please go cop the book and continue to follow these conversations. Please check out the game tonight. And once again, thank you all for coming out on this Thursday afternoon to talk about ball with us and all the other things that go with it. And thank you both.